Because let's be candid as Kenyans. I mean, tuodoe PR. We talked about the regime of President Kibaki. We talked about the regime of Uhuru Kenyatta. We are now talking about this regime. So I want to request my brother to tell me, who was chairman of budget during President Kibaki's time? And why do they not get compliments for the work he did? Let us assign responsibility where it is due. And let us be honest. The committees in parliament, and especially when the committees on the government side, departmental committees, budget committee, what you do is to propagate the agenda of the collective responsibility. But we have to know where the buck stops. And that is why when we analyze South Korea, we analyze the then President General Park. So I think that suffices for now. But let me just add, at the time when I served as the chairman of budget, because my issue about borrowing is more about the illegal debts. None. There was no single illegal loan, secret loan taken in Kenya. And I actually attended one meeting with the people in the National Treasury. I don't know whether Rafael was there. And we actually declined and refused the issue of securitization. Even the current PS of the National Treasury was not for securitization, was not for those illegal loans. And therefore, again, you cannot rub the records through a rubber. You can go to the websites. There was no securitization when I was budget chair. There was no illegal boats. Every borrowing was in the main book of government. I was chairman of budget, and it's important that I say that in parliament, there are 3 committees that deal directly with the economy. And forgive me, I'll be talking very fast because I have very little time. So, budget committee only deals with expenditure, where the money is going. There is actually a committee in parliament called debt and privatization. And therefore the issues I talk about debt is not based on where I was. It is based on, the issue is very important for the country. There is a substantive committee with a chairman in parliament dealing with debt. The revenue side also, there is a committee called finance. Finance deals with taxes and where the money is coming from. I thought it's good I make that distinction because I can see that you need that clarification. Now, going direct to the numbers, I have listened to my brother from the National Treasury. And in this kind of a conference, we don't come here to see who wins the debate. From my perspective, we come here to see how we can lay a good basis for our economy. Any part we can play, whether positive criticism or actually doing it, is welcome. And therefore my presentation will be based on how can we make our country better. And therefore the figures I'll be laying forward are not based on countering what the DG of in the National Treasury talked about. It will just be because if we just let one voice proceed, we may end up believing it to be true. So it is important we give all the divergent views with the hope of finding a good basis for the welfare of our country. And I will start here because I listened to him, so that even as I give my figures, we have the right perspective. He talked about debt in our country. And I'll just highlight one so that we are able also to, when we hear anything coming especially from even government, we have expertise here to actually verify. The economy of Kenya is projected to be around 131 billion US dollars by end of this year. That means it's allowed 60.9 trillion, thereabout. The debt in Kenya is 12.5 trillion now. So when we talk about debt to GDP ratio, we must never massage the denominator. Because you can just take your calculator now, tell me 12.5 divided by 16.9, whether it is 64% as he presented. It is actually over 70% debt to GDP ratio. So it is important we, as Kenya, we be very factual with our data, so that when we report figures that has GDP in it, we don't massage GDP, either inflate it or whatever to give us the right parameters that we need. Let me go back to my presentation. In 2003, when President Kibaki took over, the debt in Kenya was 600 billion Kenya shillings. 600 billion Kenya shillings when President Kibaki took over. By the time he left, it was around 1.8 trillion Kenya shillings. And therefore President Kibaki borrowed roughly, because there are some decimal points, around 1.2 trillion Kenya shillings for the entire 10 years he was president. And therefore he was borrowing around 120 billion every, it's actually 100 billion every year. When President Uhuru Kenyatta took over, the debt was 1.8 trillion. In 2022, the public debt in Kenya was 8.7 trillion Kenya shillings. And therefore he borrowed around, we can say 7 trillion. So in every year, he was borrowing roughly 700 billion shillings. There is a reason I'm giving these figures. The current administration, when it took over, the debt was 8.7 trillion Kenya shillings. Now, as we talk with you today, the legal debts, because there are others which I'll talk about, the legal debt is 12.5 trillion Kenya shillings. And therefore, in that span of less than 3 years, Kenya has borrowed 3.8 trillion Kenya shillings. And therefore, Kenya is borrowing 1.25 trillion Kenya shillings every year. And therefore, the money Kibaki borrowed in 10 years, we are borrowing every year. And therefore, every day, we are borrowing 3.5 billion shillings every day. So this conference will be here for a week. So by the time you go back to Nairobi, you can do the calculations. That is the legal debt. Those who follow politics of Africa, you must have followed the politics of Senegal last year, where two gentlemen, that is Diomaye Faye and Osman Sonko, they are currently the president and the prime minister respectively, were actually had been locked in by government then. They campaigned for only 10 days and won, only 10 days, because people were fed up that time. Upon assuming office, please give me some water, Prof. I think this needs cooling off.